Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Vinny Johnson with 1 second to go. He's got it.
Hello and welcome to the Motor City Hoops podcast. If you are new to the Motor City Hoops podcast, I'm your host, Bryce Simon, a former D1 hooper, current teacher, coach, husband, father of 3 amazing kids, and contributor at Detroit Bad Boys of SB Nation. After you finish this episode, make sure you also go back and check out Friday morning's instant reaction episode with Laz Jackson of Detroit Bad Boys, where he and I gave our immediate reaction to the Pistons trade deadline moves. We will also be bringing on Keith Smith for an entire NBA trade deadline recap on Wednesday morning, and we will be dropping some major news for the Motor City Hoops podcast at the beginning of that episode. Trust me, you do not want to miss that. But let's get to this episode, and we have the pleasure yet again to be joined by an amazing basketball mind, someone that has joined the podcast a few times now, Pistons beat writer for The Athletic, James Edwards III. James, welcome back to Motor City Hoops, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, I appreciate you having me. Thank you for the kind intro. I'm not sure everybody would agree with you, but I appreciate you saying it on your pod. And I've heard about the news. Congratulations. I'm excited for you guys to announce it. Obviously, I won't say much more than that, but I'm excited.
Thank you. Yes. James is one of a handful of people. Laz actually played it off whenever Laz knows, and he played it off.
Knew.
Yeah, he played it off like he didn't, which I appreciated. I almost like called him out, like, Laz, you don't have to act like you don't, but he played it well. But thank you, James. I did know that you and I hadn't talked about it, but I did know that you knew about it. So thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, of course. You almost slipped up right there.
I
like
did
that you caught yourself. Yeah,
I almost slipped up. People are going to be, hopefully people don't rewind this too many times and like try to pick up maybe a little suspense now. But
yeah.
I wanted to have James on for this episode because we've had a couple days now to digest all the news from the trade deadline. I even dropped my Marving Bagley III breakdown on Detroit Bad Boys, which should be out by the time you listen to this podcast. So let's just start there, James. I know there's 2 major nuggets to the Pistons trade deadline, but let's start with the trade that did happen. Marving Bagley III, real quick. Sacramento gets DiVincenzo, Lyles Jackson. Milwaukee gets Serge Ibaka and 2 second-rounders from Detroit. The Clippers, Rodney Hood, Semi Ojeleye, and, of course, Detroit with Marvin Bagley III. Just real quick, overall thoughts on Marvin Bagley III to the Pistons.
Yeah, something is, if you follow me at The Athletic, I kind of hinted at was brewing for a little bit. So not surprised that it happened in the final hour, or I guess final few hours. Bagley is a guy that the organization kind of had on their wish list when it comes to reclamation projects. Talented as all hell offensively, can score at the rim. I think shot 70% throughout his career. I would say a new age version, a more athletic version of Greg Monroe in a sense. Both lefties, both better with around the basket. But Bagley, of course, has the athleticism that Greg Monroe is just not given out of birth. But you see some similarities there. A new age Greg Monroe is kind of how I see Marvin Bagley. Defensively, he's a 4. You don't want him to be the anchor of your defense. You kind of want him to be the help side defender, to use his length and his athleticism to disrupt shots, and kind of similar what you see Jerami do. But maybe on a higher level, just given that Marvin is more of a natural forward, or I'm sorry, more of a natural big. I think he fills a hole on the Pistons roster, which is athleticism. We'll see if the new situation helps him. I don't think anybody would disagree that. I mean, he has 3 seasons averaging 14 points a game. The kid can score. So the Pistons need some offense, and it was a low risk gamble at the end of the day. Trey and Josh obviously weren't part of the future, and Marvin has a audition here to prove that he is. And I like the trade a lot for Detroit.
Yeah, and I want to get back to and talk about the defense in just a second, but let's talk about what he does best. Just let's get into the weeds just a little bit offensively. I've watched the film. I truly do, and I know this is a joke about Dwayne Casey and the Pistons offense and all that, sticking guys in the corner, but like they truly did this with Marvin Bagley III in Sacramento, and a little bit based on personnel because he was always playing with like another big who wasn't necessarily a floor spacer, but he does have some vertical pop. And I don't know, James, like I think I think he's a really good scorer 15 feet and in. Like, I think there's a
Yeah.
really good skill level. Like, I know he doesn't have a very good right hand, but lefties just find a way, it seems like. Even though people know they're left-handed and are going to go to it, they find a way as they grow up to always get to that left hand. Like, do you really buy into the offensive game, at least just scoring-wise?
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, like you said, Bryce is somebody who's grown up playing. Like, even though if you know a guy's left-handed, you're just naturally used to guarding righties, and it takes a little bit of adjusting when you're in the heat of a game. So there's always a benefit to have being a left-handed player. But in terms of Bagley, like, yeah, I mean, he has the size and the athleticism to finish over guys. He has the craft to get to the rim. I think he has a good back to the basket game. I think he can face up. He's got some good foot speed offensively. Yeah, he's a scorer. That's why he was drafted. He possessed tools that really kind of looked like at some point, if all went well, he could be an elite scorer at the 4 spot. The shooting hasn't come along, but his shot's not broken. So he could develop into that as well. But I think right now, I think you're comfortable with him playing his back to the basket and facing up and doing short rolls and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think he's a really high-level offensive rebounder as well with a good motor and obviously the athletic, kind of vertical pop that he has. Let's go to the defensive end because I watched it a lot. That was the conceived notions about it. You mentioned him playing the 4, not the 5. I think I agree with that because I don't think he protects the rim particularly well. He can't anchor the defense. But I just want to say this. Like, I think he is invested on that end. This may sound like a contradiction. He's just not very good. Like, I think his awareness, like he can't survey the entire floor and see what's going on. Like, I have a kid like this on my high school team. He wants to be good on defense, but he literally can't process it all while it's going on. So then it looks like he's not playing hard. What have you heard? What have you seen? What do you know about him on the defensive end?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, I think it's similar to Hami. I think Hami's engaged and he tries hard, but there's just times where it's come to the processing part that makes it look like, like he doesn't know what he's doing. It's like, yeah, he might not know what he's doing, but it's not that he's not trying. It's just the processing. Not everybody processes things at the same speed. And I think that's the same thing for Bagley. I think he doesn't necessarily survey the floor and anticipate well when it comes to multiple actions and keeping that in front of him. But I do think there is something there when it comes to help side defense. And when somebody's an attacker is being a little bit more direct, I think Bagley can be effective in coming over to help. He obviously has great length and he can get a defensive rebound and go. I think there are things to like there, but I agree. Like, it's not that he's not. I think there are times he wasn't engaged, but I might chalk that up more to the situation and just kind of to beat a dead horse. Like, it was clear that there was not mutual love between Sacramento and Marvin Bagley for a while there. So I would chalk up the lack of engagement at times to that. But I think, like you said, Bryce, there are times he's shown to be engaged. It's just the processing part.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before earlier in the season when you came on the podcast and the Pistons were struggling mightily offensively and we felt like it was affecting their defense. And it's the same thing for individual players. We talked about this, whenever, I'm fortunate enough that I get a chat with you at times about the Pistons, throughout the week or after games. And we've talked about this with Isaiah Stewart. Like, let him touch the ball every once in a while, and that's going to help a player's activity increase. And so, again, not to beat the dead horse, but there was definitely some of that with Bagley in Sacramento. But speaking of Stewart, what is his fit? What is Bagley III's fit with the current Pistons bigs? I know people have talked about, is he going to start? Is he not? Can he play with Stewart? Does he better with Olynyk? Where do you see him kind of fitting into the lineup?
Yeah, I think, and we'll get to this a little bit more just based on our conversation pre-recording, but yeah, he's going to come off the bench. There is a financial benefit in him not reaching 2,000 minutes or starting 41 games. Jerami Grant is still on the roster. Like I said, Marvin Bagley is not a 5. Isaiah is more of a 5, even if he's undersized defensively. He's more of a 5. He's going to come off the bench. He's going to fill, I think, the Lyles role in terms of just being maybe we'll see if it's better, but a focal point of the offense and being able to have the freedom to be aggressive and to go get his own shot. I think they're going to give him that freedom. But yeah, he's not going to start unless there's an injury or something.
And then I want to ask about the contract because you've mentioned this in your article. are they going to extend him? What is the plan, or what are you hearing is the plan for him in the offseason? Because even though the numbers you brought up, affects the qualifying offer number, the cap hold, I believe Rod, and you probably tweeted this out as well, still stays at $28 million no matter what the qualifying offer ends up being. So the Pistons can't go into the summer, into the offseason with that cap hold on Marvin Bagley III. I don't think anyway. So what do you think? How does this get worked out, assuming he plays – not crazy good or crazy bad, but kind of what real expectation should be?
Yeah, I'm not a cap expert, but I believe if they're able to get him for, I think if they get him for under the qualifying offer, the cap hit goes away. I think the cap hit is only there if he's signed using like the qualifying offer. I could be mistaken on that. Don't quote me on that. I think the goal is to get him for as cheap as possible. And if there is a situation, unless he like completely outperforms or completely shows that he's Marvin Bagley, the number 2 pick of 2018, I think they're going to try to get him for as low a price as possible and get him under team control for at minimum 2 years. I think they're going to try for 3.
Okay, and so one last thing, and then I want to move to Jerami Grant. Obviously, we need to talk about that. But John Hollinger from The Athletic, not to like stir the pot any, but he put Detroit in the "What are we doing here?" for his article, kind of recapping the trade. And his point of view was this was not a trade they needed to make. They could have just signed him in the offseason. Just kind of looking, reading between the lines, doesn't seem to be very high on Bagley the third at all. Do you think that's could have been a better approach from the Pistons? Just let Bagley hit restricted free agency from the Kings and go sign him in the offseason? Or do you like that they went ahead and made this move now?
Love John. Great guy. I don't agree with this. I think his beef was giving up the second round picks, which neither one were the Pistons. They were from other teams, one of which was Sacramento's that they got that the Pistons got in the Corey Joseph trade. So they just sent that one back. So like the second round picks aren't that big of a deal to me. But obviously he was in the front office and maybe has a different appreciation for second round picks. I would also say when you have interest in a guy that is set to be a free agent, whether restricted or not, it's never a bad idea. If there's interest to have him in-house and to get acclimated and to show him how you're going to utilize him, to show him that he's wanted. You're kind of getting an early jump on the pitch in the summer by bringing him in now. So I mean, if he's here and he's playing consistently and he's playing well, he likes his teammates. That helps you out in the offseason when it's time to sign him. And also, and I don't know if this was their thinking. I haven't talked to anybody about this, but what if Bagley goes somewhere else at the deadline? What if it's Oklahoma City and he meets the criteria for starter minutes or game started, and the price tag is a little weirder? Like the Pistons are controlling the situation now by adding him now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I saw that. And again, I'm not trying to critique John Hollinger by any means. He knows way more about this than I could ever imagine. I just, it was something I also disagreed with. And so I was curious to get your opinion as well. Let's move into Jerami Grant. I thought Pistons Twitter was going to explode, James. And again, I guess this is like a subtle flex or humble brag or something. I don't know. But, I get the opportunity to talk to you, and you've kind of been able to tell me I've asked you what the chances were and you've given me a number. And so I think my perspective was a little bit more in line with what ended up happening. Why ultimately did Jerami Grant not get traded?
Yeah, Troy had a price. The price wasn't met. And I mean, even I've had to learn this just being around an organization. And if you're a GM and you have something that people want, like you set the price, you don't let other people set the price for you. They were in no rush to trade Jerami. So Troy had the leverage. He's by making it clear or making it known that which isn't the case, but just using this as an example. If he had made it known that Jerami is gone or they want Jerami to go, he loses the leverage, right? So it minimizes what he can ask for. When they're in no rush to trade Jerami, when they like Jerami, they keep all the leverage. So like I said, there's patience. They didn't get what they wanted to consider trading Jerami, so they go into the summer with They go to the rest of the season with Jerami and can revisit in the summer if somebody meets whatever the asking price is at that time. But as for this deadline, teams offered, teams called. Troy had a price, it wasn't met, and they decided to keep Jerami.
So what were some of the teams, like you see all these reports? I mean, I feel like there was every team was reported. Are there any teams that like were truly, invested, teams that were really there, that really liked Jerami? Was there anything that came out like, man, it was really close, or did anybody really get that close to meeting what Troy Weaver wanted?
I don't think anybody got super duper close. From my understanding, but I mean, yeah, Portland, I think Brooklyn like I mentioned, Brooklyn poked around, Washington, I'm trying to think, Sacramento, there were discussions, but nobody, I don't think there was anything that, like, I don't think there was the Pistons backed out at the last second type deal. Like, I think they answered calls, teams knew what the price would be, teams tried to talk maybe Troy down, Troy didn't budge. And here we are. Jerami's still on the team.
Yeah, and I want to get into this Troy Weaver thing in just a second, because I think he showed this deadline, like maybe he's not the quote-unquote gunslinger or whatever you want to call it, that maybe the rep he got, like he held to his cards and, made calculated decisions. We'll get to that in a second. I want to ask about just Jerami Grant. I don't mind Jerami Grant. I do think he's tried to adjust his game a little bit from what we saw earlier in the season. And we haven't seen him and Cade a ton yet. We saw him on Friday night together finally, and I haven't even got to watch that game yet. But is there a world where like maybe this works better than what people think, and Jerami maybe plays his way into a role that ends up sticking long-term with the Pistons? Like, is that a possibility, do you think?
Yeah, like, I don't think it's impossible. I think as you know, Bryce, like when you peruse Twitter, people are like, Jerami is best at the role he did in Denver. And sure, agreed. But like, what if the Pistons, who are potentially lining up for another top 3 pick, get a guy who's ready to go? What if Jabari Smith is legit and you pair him with Cade? What if Jaden Ivey is legit and you pair him with Cade? Well, there's 2 guys right there, and everybody's talking about Jerami's more of a third guy. Well, Jerami would be the third guy then. And he's a good basketball player. So, I mean, and then there's also free agency. What if the Pistons land Jalen Brunson or something like that? Like then Jerami's fit is a little bit more defined and he's better in the role that he's in. It's closer to a Denver role. So I think a lot of it dictates on like what happens this summer, where they pick, what free agents they're able to attract and acquire. But there's certainly a world, like, I think there are people who are turning on Jerami, as you know, but I think most of those people would agree that Jerami on a good team is third, fourth option. And it's possible that happens in Detroit if a few things go right over the next 6 months. So at the end of the day, he's a good basketball player. I don't think anybody questions that. I think it's more so people's beef is with him playing up the pecking order, which if I were Jerami Grant and I'm looking at the roster around me, I would think the same thing, It's not the outside of K. Are we sure anybody else has better scoring ability than Jerami? I don't think we are. Sadiq has shown stuff, but Sadiq has been up and down at times this year. Like I wouldn't say he's clear cut ahead of Jerami in the pecking order. I know obviously why fans want him to be. He's younger and he's a homegrown talent. I get that, but I wouldn't say at this point in time that's like clear cut. So yeah, I think there is a world in which Jerami in the next 6 months is third or fourth on the Pistons pecking order, and that's perfect. And that's the best utilization of Jerami Grant. I'm not saying that will happen, but there's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, I thought about that the other day. I'm like you said, like, let's say they get Jaden Ivey. Maybe that's who they ended up with. Like, all of a sudden people fit into the spot, the lineup, like pretty nice. Like that all works together. If it ended up being a top 3 guy, like maybe it gets a little clunky with, guys that need to play the 4. But like you said, there's a real world to me where Jerami Grant stays on the Pistons in the role that everybody wants Jerami Grant to play on the Pistons. Then it would be, is he willing to play that role? Would he be happy in it? And then I think the real caveat for me, James, and maybe you can give us just a quick, thought on this, and then we'll move on to Troy Weaver, is the contract. It's been reported 4 for almost 120. I've seen 4 for 100, which I would be a lot more comfortable with. I mean, where do you think that could land?
Well, I think the max he can sign is 4 for 112. Like, it can't. That's his current max deal. Are there teams out there who might be willing to pay that? I'm sure there are. Will Detroit? I would be surprised if they went to 4 for 120, just because I know how much they're valuing having cap space these next 2 years and flexibility. However, is there a world in which, like, has been reported, Jerami likes Detroit, Detroit likes Jerami? Is there a world where they get him for cheaper than that, and it makes a little bit more sense for Detroit to tie him up long term if it's 4 for 86 or something like that, or something like I don't know, just spitballing here, but I think there is a world in which the extent, if he's extended in Detroit, it's not necessarily for the max. I don't think that's out of the question.
And I think what listeners have to remember too, and I kind of looked this up the other day as I was talking about this, was the cap is supposed to explode here over the next few years, right? Like, because of a new TV deal that's coming. So some of these contracts and numbers that are like, $20 million a year, like that's going to be a really reasonable contract in 2 or 3 years from now if the cap jumps the way that they're talking about. I want to ask one final question on the Pistons, and then I do want to get some of your thoughts on the NBA trade deadline as a whole, give you a chance to talk about some teams outside of Detroit. But, I mentioned Troy Weaver in terms of, like, he made all these moves, right? The first 12 months, he essentially, turned over the entire roster. I felt like he showed some really good restraint, just as an outsider, restraint here at the trade deadline. Like, this is the guy I want. It sounds like he pinpointed Marving Bagley III, didn't give up too much for him, brought him to Detroit. He put a mark on Jerami Grant. He said, if I don't get this, we're going to hold on to him. Like, I like that as a fan. Like, I almost got nervous. Like, is this guy just going to constantly be recycling players, which I know some fans may actually like.
Yeah.
But what is your takeaway after 12 months of just transactions? It was a relatively quiet trade deadline for Troy Weaver.
Yeah, I expected this deadline to be quiet. I think the biggest thing is when he first came in here and did all the trades, like, that was to get guys that now that he runs the show, guys that he's kind of liked from afar, or saw some interesting things in from afar, and now that it's his show, he went out and got him and built the roster his way. I think if anybody was a GM and they have a chance for the first time to put together a team their way, whether or not it's destined to win or not, I think even just getting guys that you always maybe had one eye on or one finger on and not necessarily haven't been able to pull the trigger because you're not running the show. Like, I think that's where you saw it. Like, it was a guy who's finally running the show, has been an assistant GM forever. He's like, well, if we're going to go through this rebuild, let me get some guys in here that I think could maybe show some stuff. And I think that was part of it. And now, and Bryce, we've talked about it in our conversations, and I've written about it a bunch. Like, we've talked about it a bunch. The draft is the focus in Detroit. This is how franchises like this rise from out the mud. The reason Detroit, well, it's not the only reason. They've drafted bad over the last decade. They've picked in the 7s through 12s and just picked the wrong guys, but you tend to get better players when you're picking 1 through 3. And Detroit has positioned themselves for the second straight year to pick 1 through 3 to get a very good talent. And that's just the best way to build this thing going forward. Young, talented players that are cheap until you can build out the rest of your roster and see who's staying. And I think there's a patience there that I think it's twofold. There's a patience there that fans aren't used to. And I think it also, and in turn, that leads to some confusion, because I think there are people who are, I always say this, and people always yell at me, stop talking down to fans when I say this, but it's just, I don't know how it's considered talking down to fans. You cannot dock Troy and this current staff for what the previous regimes didn't do. So because the Pistons have been bad for the last decade by not rebuilding the right way, that doesn't mean that the new guys shouldn't come in and try to rebuild it the right way. You know what I mean? Like, yes. I understand that you've been sitting through losing basketball for a decade, but that doesn't mean that necessarily the way that they're doing it isn't the best case to go. It is the best case to go. Just nobody did it before him. They just lost by injuries and bad signings and bad drafting. Now they're doing it, quote unquote, the right way, building through the draft, adding talented pieces. You see Cade, you see Sadiq. They're going to get another one this year. And like, I get it. I totally understand why fans don't want this to last forever. You're a fan because you want to see your team win. You want to support your team. You want to have a reason to go play. But from a front office perspective, and I can tell you as somebody who's in the arena every day, the seats aren't as empty as they used to be. Like, people are going to these games. Like, I think the Pistons have made a significant leap in revenue and stuff this season. And Cade is a big part of that. So you add another Cade level potential player in terms of just the interest coming into the draft. Like, then you're setting yourself up for success for a healthy foundation. And I think, again, totally understand it, totally sympathize with fans. Like, just, it's tough to sit through a bunch of losing seasons, but I don't think Troy and them, the fact that they're showing patience when others didn't, doesn't mean that this needs to be sped up. It means that they're doing it the right way.
No, I agree. And so as a fan, I can understand the impatience. Like, I got way too excited for this season and how much success the Pistons could have. Like, people can go listen to previous podcasts, pull out the receipts, and I get it. But then I think I reevaluated my expectations and what the team was. And like, I know it's not always good basketball, but I still enjoy watching this team play. Like you brought up, they have Cade Cunningham. And even when he doesn't play, you have Sadiq Bey. I enjoy watching and seeing Killian Hayes' improvement or lack thereof. Or, does he have a good night or does he have a bad night? Same thing. You and I talk about Isaiah Stewart all the time and watching for those things. You have Bagley III. And then, like you said, like I have talked about this, you've mentioned a couple times now, this offseason is big, especially with the draft. Like, I do think there's some pressure on the front office to get this pick correct, moving into next year. But it is hard to have patience, but I still think there's still something intriguing to me. It's almost like everybody was excited about last year and then it's all wore off. And I'm like, a lot of those pieces are still here, plus Cade Cunningham. I don't know. I still don't mind watching them. I still get excited every game that every day they're going to play.
Yeah. I mean, as somebody who's covered this team for 5 years, like I find it's far more interesting to go into work every day with this team than previous teams. You just know whether or not it works or not. People have a right to be excited. We don't know if it's actually going to work. And I'm not saying when I defend the process that they're doing to get there, I agree with the process. I'm not telling you it's going to work, but I like the process. If it's going to work or not depends on who they draft, what free agents they're able to get in. Like, we're still some time away from knowing if the process worked, but I do think this is the right process to take.
Yes, I agree. All right, let's move off the Pistons for 10 minutes here. I want to first ask you, so big picture trade deadline, and for the listeners, we're going to really get into the weeds with Keith Smith on Wednesday morning. So come back for that one. But I did want to give James a chance just to talk because I know he's a big basketball and NBA fan in general. So I wanted to get his thoughts. What was your favorite trade that happened on Thursday?
Ooh, I loved Cleveland getting LeVert. I think that was a type of piece they needed. He's from Ohio. They needed a scoring guard. I like that Cleveland has kind of weathered are they for real for a few months and like are legitimately, as we're recording, the number 2 seed, and they made a move to go for it. Like, I like that. I like what Cleveland has built. They've stumbled into some things, but hey, it takes a little bit of luck to win in this league. And adding Karras, I think, was a good piece, especially with Sexton out. And I like LeVert more than Sexton, so they could let Sexton go. I like that addition just for a team that sees a window and is jumping for it.
All right, so you took the words right. You and I have had this conversation about Colin Sexton before, and I wanted to be able to tie all these into the Pistons. So that immediately, it sounds like Sexton's got to be on his way out. Like, I know he's a restricted free agent, but it would seem he doesn't necessarily have a role with them. I mean, maybe, but you and I have talked about this. I won't speak for you, but do you think the Pistons should or could have interest in Colin Sexton in free agency?
I mean, if the price is right, sure. Like, he's not a bad NBA player, but I don't think they're going to – I'd be surprised if they backed up the truck for Colin Sexton. I'll say that.
Okay. The trade that surprised you the most?
the player Halliburton getting traded surprised me.
Yes.
Not necessarily the trade, but I will say the Wizards and Mavs. I still don't really understand why the Mavs did that. I still like now I just think when you get into the playoffs, like you just gonna need, like, even if Porzingis isn't what he was, but like they don't have any front court defensive like fear. Like, who's afraid of anybody in that front court in Dallas now? Like, defensively, and maybe nobody was afraid of Porzingis, but at least Porzingis can disrupt stuff. I don't know. I didn't understand that from Dallas's perspective, but that was, and I also just didn't. Yeah, that was just a shocking trade. It kind of came out of left field.
I do want to come back to Halliburton in that trade, but again, I like to do our little Pistons ties here with the Dallas and the Washington trade. Jalen Brunson, you brought him up earlier. He's been talked a lot about with Pistons fans. Some would be excited about that, some not so much. You know, maybe there's no correlation. Maybe I'm stretching it here a little bit, but Spencer Dinwiddie did come to Dallas in that trade. Is there a chance maybe that makes it a little more likely that Dallas would not match an offer for Jalen Brunson if, say, a team like the Pistons gave him an offer sheet?
Well, that was my thinking on why Dallas added Spencer Dinwiddie. Like, my first thought was like, well, do they know Brunson's not coming back? Or do they know they're not going to go to where Brunson might want the money to go and another team meets it? That's just my first initial thought. So I think it's definitely possible. I know there is, I fully assume and predict that the Pistons will go after Jalen Brunson in some capacity this summer. Whether or not they get him, that's a different story. But I do think Brunson is somebody of interest for the organization. And maybe that, like you said, maybe that was a way for Dallas to kind of plug and play, try to just figure it out now in the short term, and then in the long term, maybe it sorts itself out a little bit more, and it maybe makes a little bit more sense from their perspective.
Okay, I want to get to the Halliburton trade because I'm with you. Like, that was about the only non-Pistons one I tweeted about because they were coming so fast. I was like overwhelmed anyway. But like, I did not expect Tyrese Halliburton to get traded. But here's my question: like, was that really as lopsided as, like, I feel like the overreaction was to like, holy cow, we did not expect Tyrese Halliburton to get traded.
Yeah.
Domantas Sabonis isn't a bad player, and
he's the best player in that trade.
And he's a better fit, right? Like, whether, like, you can argue that maybe the Kings aren't in fit mode. Fine.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, he probably does more for De'Aaron Fox than what Halliburton does. And they have Davion Mitchell, who doesn't suck. Like, he's a good defender, has had a good rookie year. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying, like, the value wasn't crazy bad, right?
Yeah, no. I think, or at least for me, my overreaction, I think I tweeted the Kings traded who? Like, that, it was just a shock of Halliburton being traded. The Kings got the best player in the deal, Domantas Sabonis, who I think could fit well with De'Aaron Fox. They obviously are trying to end a long playoff drought. So the mandate is eerily similar to just the Pistons of a few years ago. Like, they're just trying to get into the playoffs. And I think Domantas gives them a better chance to do that. Now, my beef with the trade was I just don't know that the ceiling is that much higher, if higher at all, with Sabonis rather than Halliburton. Like I said, I think naturally that Kings team will be better, but is that Kings team going to go win a series? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm not saying I would have made the move, and I can't believe they traded Halliburton. I get it, but I'm just saying, like, you did get a 25-year-old, I believe is what Sabonis is, on a decent contract. You know, like, he only makes $18.5 million. So it's not like, it wasn't just insane in terms of what they got back. Was it the smart move? Maybe not. But just in terms of value, I didn't think it was crazy.
You got to trade good stuff to get good stuff.
Yep.
I was just shocked that Halliburton was traded. And tie it back to the Pistons. People might not remember this or they forget. Troy drafted Sabonis in OKC.
Oh, okay. I did not remember that. So interesting.
That was one of his guys.
Okay, so final one here. Let's talk about the Portland Trail Blazers, who, I mean, unless I'm mistaken, were the most active team at the deadline. A little Pistons tie here with Jerami Grant. I'm not the only one that said this, but other people, plenty of people have said it. But to me, it almost made more sense for the Blazers not to be in on Grant at the deadline, because I feel like they want to lose as many games as possible the rest of the season and then build it back up in the offseason, maybe trade for Jerami Grant then if they really do have interest. But what do you agree with that, James? And then the Blazers overall, what they did at the deadline?
Yes, I think that is they are not going to, like, they're not rebuilding, they're retooling. They are going to just punt on this season because Dame is out. Clearly the Dame CJ thing didn't work. They punted on that, and they're just going to be bad the rest of the year in draft and figure out where to go from there. And then they're going to be active in free agency and on the trade market. The Portland Trail Blazers, you can book it now, assuming Dame has an injury that's out for 2 years, are going to try to be good again next year. This isn't a Detroit Pistons situation. And then, I mean, yeah, like they had a lot of like, what are they doing? Like, I don't think they necessarily got good value for Norm Powell and Robert Covington, even though Covington has not had a good year. I still just don't think they got the proper value for those two. But at the end of the day, they're going to be having a lot of cap space. They still have Dame Lillard. Guys will likely want to play with Dame Lillard. They're in a good position to retool and come back next year with an interesting team and I would say a better built team too.
Okay, very last question. I promise. Who won the Sixers-Nets deal?
The Nets. I like the Nets. I will say if they play in a series, they're going to have a tough time stopping Embiid, and it's going to be on these Seth Curry,
Patty Mills,
LaMarcus Aldridge's, Patty Mills to hit shots because they're going to struggle guarding Embiid with that team. But I think Simmons and KD are a good pairing. We've talked about when the Nets were being built, we were all joking about defense. Well, they went and got one of the best defenders in the NBA. They got a star that'll defer, that has no issue deferring, as we know, but he's deferring to arguably the greatest forward to play the game, their greatest scoring forward to ever play the game, and they are adding Ben Simmons to a team that doesn't necessarily need him to be the number 2 scoring option. They have Kyrie as well, assuming they have him for road games if they get to the finals. Yeah. But yeah, it's a good fit. They addressed the need. I think they got like the perfect kind of glue star. Like we talk about Draymond, the perfect glue star. I think Ben has the potential to be that with the Brooklyn Nets.
Harden and Embiid, you like the fit, or you think it could be wonky?
I like the fit because I think it's just going to be entertaining as hell. But I also think Harden is going to have to adjust his game a little bit. I think he's shown, I know people might say otherwise, but I think he's been able to like adjust his game depending on who's around him. I don't really think the pick and rolls with Embiid are going to be a main factor. And I think Harden is going to have to, I think Harden's going to have to defer to Embiid. Embiid's arguably one of the best. I mean, he's not arguably, he is one of the best players in the league. He's arguably the MVP. Harden's going to maybe for the first time, well, I guess he deferred to KD, but he's going to have to defer again. I think it's Embiid's team. I think they're going to still be at their best running through Embiid. I like it. It's better than having a vacant hole there in their roster. You're adding one of the best scorers of all time. So I like it for them too, but I just think Brooklyn hit a couple birds with one stone on that deal.
Yeah, and like everybody said, like great players find a way. James Harden will figure it out. He's not necessarily my favorite player in the league, but he is a great player, and they'll figure it out. But those games are going to be miserable to watch, James, because that's going to be a parade to the free throw line with those two guys.
Yeah, it really will be. Yeah, Philly might lead the league, and if they don't lead the league in free throws now, they might by the end of the year.
No doubt, no doubt. James, man, this was a blast. Thank you so much. I got to let you go. But thank you for joining us, and just give a chance everybody to find you. If I'm sure they already are, but on Twitter, the content you put out and the podcast you do.
Yeah, I appreciate you for having me. Always fun chatting with you. I'm on Twitter at JL Edwards III. Go to The Athletic under the Pistons tab. That's me. Bun and Cardigan Show podcast on the Athletic app, on Apple, on Spotify, all that good stuff.
Yes, make sure you check that out. I believe dropping Monday morning. I think you have an all mailbag episode, right?
I do. I'm flying solo on Valentine's Day. Nick had a date apparently.
Big time. Man, that's crazy. He picked the day over recording, man.
Man,
Nick's got to get his priorities in order.
He moves to LA and doesn't know how to act.
Well done. As always, I want to thank Wes Davenport for everything he does for me and Motor City Hoops. He has truly made a major impact on our growth. I also want to thank all of you for listening to and supporting Motor City Hoops and all of the content we're producing. Again, I want to remind you to check back Wednesday morning for our episode with Keith Smith, contributor at Spot Track, Celtics blog, and the Front Office Show, where we break down all the moves made at the deadline and make a major announcement about the future of Motor City Hoops podcast. Thank you, go Pistons, and talk to you soon.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do